prepared a report, and it's entitled Addressing the Challenge of an Aging Population in Bermuda. I don't think people really, they probably don't understand it the way they should, the seriousness of this here, Mr. Speaker, because when we talk about the age dependency ratio, there was a study done for the years 2017 to 2026 on the ratio of age dependency. And let me try to explain that a little better, Mr. Speaker. What that means is that in Bermuda, in 2017, we had 28 seniors over 65 to every 100 people that you could depend on, meaning that they were still in the workforce, meaning they're from ages 24 to 64, Mr. Speaker. Within that 9-year period in Bermuda, that average increased from 28 to 43.6, double digits, Mr. Speaker, which means that in that short period of time, there is 44 seniors for every 100 working people, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, when you compare the 10 countries, Canada, Germany, Japan, China, India, the USA, UK, France, and Italy, their dependency was half of what we have done in that period of time. And it takes me to my next point, Mr. Speaker, that because studies have been done, and we've heard the Minister Hayward state that we need about 8,000 workers in this country. But I think people take that wrong. They think that the minister wants to just bring 8,000 people in here and displace Bermudians. How wrong can they be, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, the government headed by the Minister of Economy has been trying to get investors in Bermuda. And that's how you increase your jobs in Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, when we take the Southampton Princess will have at sometimes 1,000 people up there working in order to get it ready for opening. And then I think they'll have just over 700 when they're finally open in stage 1, people that are not employed now. And they're hoping, and we're hoping, that we can get at least 70% Bermudians. And let me say this, I endorse the remarks that Colonel Birch made, I think it was Friday night, on the Southampton Princess. He was correct, he was right. He said it on the radio, I think it was Thursday, and he was spot on, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, I feel not comfortable that we're going to be able to staff that hotel with the number of Bermudians that Southampton Princess would like to do, or we would like to do, Mr. Speaker, because, and the reason why I say that, Mr. Speaker, one time in Bermuda, if a bartender lost his job at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock you had another Bermudian. Well, today, it's not like that. Today we got foreigners as bartenders. And I do know, Mr. Speaker, in the unionized shops in Bermuda, hotels that is, that the basic rate for a bartender was probably one of the best. And then on top of that, you got the 15%. So if you work, you made a pretty good wage, Mr. Speaker. So now we can't even find sufficient Bermudians to work as a bartender. And I want to thank Bacardi for the program that they are going to have introduced in Bermuda to send 10 overseas to get them to be professional bartenders. And so this shows that this government and the private sector coming together to address the situation because they're paying for it, Mr. Speaker. I applaud them. First class, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hear people say, and I sort of get annoyed at it. They say, oh, I go to a restaurant and foreigners serve me. Well, who do you want serve you? Particularly, and I speak about the hotels because I know the rates are certainly different. The gratuities are certainly different than you get in some of the restaurants. And if you go to places like England, even United States, you find a lot of foreigners working in that industry. Somehow natives, not all of them, because I enjoyed the hotel industry, but it's not meant for everybody, Mr. Speaker. And I know a lot of people don't like to do the shift work. And one thing you'll find about the trade unions in Bermuda, we don't discriminate against workers, regardless of where they're from, Mr. Speaker, because we are affiliated to many of the international unions worldwide. And I've never heard of trade unions in Bermuda speak against foreigners. We represent them regardless of where they're from, what they look like. They get the same good representation from our unions, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this 8,000 people that we need, if we don't get those levels up, the less people you have in this country, the more expensive it becomes. Your insurance will go up because there'll be less people working to pay for the insurance, unless you can tell retirees that got to pay for insurance. And as you know, the government is embarking on a national insurance plan. And I think one of the greatest things in any country is a national plan like they have in the UK or even Portugal, for that matter, Mr. Speaker, because there's one thing that everybody should be guaranteed is health coverage, whether it's the hospital or wherever. And I say this because, I mean, we give the hospital a lot of money each year, and we're still paying. But Mr. Speaker, the other thing with Southampton Princess, with that investment in this country, over 450 million, once that gets up and going, I think it would attract more investment. I'm hoping that would attract somebody to come and take over Elbow Beach, because that would be another 150 to 200 jobs. Mr. Speaker, when we had 10,000 beds in Bermuda, we had over 35,000 workers. Bermuda was booming. But now we have lost 7,000 to 8,000 workers over the last, I guess, 10 years. It doesn't bode very well to a country that depends on foreign exchange as income, Mr. Speaker. So I really want to make the point that that Minister Hayward and the government, when they say we need 8,000 workers, they've done the homework. And no, we don't want 8,000 workers coming here, and they don't and they don't want it either with no jobs. We're not going to fluctuate, put this country, 8,000 workers on this country and no jobs for them. Anybody that thinks that way, I shouldn't say the rest, but anyhow, they shouldn't think that way, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I really want people to understand this age dependency thing, because, you know, the baby boomers born in the 50s and 60s, like Renee and that crowd were, I'm a little later than that, but they had a boom on babies this time. And Mr. Speaker, in Bermuda right now, the latest figures I saw, our deaths outnumber births. And when a country has deaths outnumbering births, we got a serious problem. You know, when a lot of you in this crowd that were born years ago, having 6 children in a family, that was a small family. Because, most people went up to 10 and 12. I had a neighbor had 19. Right, there were no TV. I can show you that. But now we're not producing enough children in order to sustain us the standard of living that we want to maintain. So I just hope people take their time, understand it. If they don't understand it, ask Minister Hayward. I'll do my best to try to explain it to them also, Mr. Speaker. But we need people in this country, but more so we need investment. And let me say that, Mr. Speaker, we want, and the minister would want, we hire Bermudians first if you're prepared to work. You cannot show up on a job for an interview and you tell the boss, well, I normally take off my granddad's birthday. Now, granddad's been going 30 years, right? And they got to do this. They're putting the conditions on the table even before they see the job description. Mr. Speaker, you either want to work or you don't. The job doesn't wait for you. And Mr. Speaker, I would venture to say practically all good workers are working right now, as it is in any country. And it may not, there are jobs out there, it may not be the job you want. But we come through that. We had to take jobs that we didn't want years ago. The main thing, we had to get income, because I remember my cousin Kenyatta, he says, when he left school, his mama gave him, I think, 5 days to get a job or he's out. He's got to take to the streets. He got a job. And it's, I guess that's what they call taking castor oil or color oil. Which one is nasty? But it's good for you. Yeah. And so, Mr. Speaker, some people want the job and they want the top dollar and they don't have the skills. Because you can carry a hammer in your hand, that don't make you a carpenter. So unfortunately, the facilities and the system that we had in place many years ago, apprenticeship scheme, is not there anymore, Mr. Speaker. And I know this government, they've offered training in the hotel and other training at the college and put money aside. I think each year the budget for education goes up. So I think the government has got it right. But we want our people to take advantage of it. Take advantage of what's available for you. You gotta have a trade, regardless what the trade is. And I think some people over the years in Bermuda, people think if you're not a doctor, lawyer, or teacher, you're not successful. Well, some of those doctors, lawyers can't fix your toilet. They can't do that fine craft work, the mill work of cabinets and stuff. And I could tell you, Bermuda's got some of the finest carpenters in the world. I've seen factory work from Bermudians. And they learned it all here, Mr. Speaker. So there are some, but let me say it before I said it, Mr. Speaker, and you will recall this. When the government built Berkeley in 2002 or 2004, they put $1 million aside. Premier Alex Scott was the minister then. And that $1 million was for anybody that goes that wants to learn a trade, whether it be carpentry, electrical, masonry. And I think it could have been $15 an hour then. And most people that went up there, probably 99%, and they was offered that job, young people, they said, no, I'll work as a labor paid a little more. And they lost the opportunity to get a trade. When we were younger, it didn't matter to us. We wanted a trade. And, we didn't get what a labor gets, but we was getting a trade and we was able to pass that benefit on to our family because we had a trade and we could make the money that was necessary to feed and clothe and everything else within, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm just asking our folks to step up. Yes, and again, I support Colonel Birch on the Ocean View knockdown. It was an eyesore. It was Earl, and the history of it. I do. Me and the history. So I think he done a great thing, despite my cousins who don't agree with him. But let nobody fool you. I certainly agree with what he done down there, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to make a contribution? Premier, you could have kept rising.
I wanted to, but I didn't want my medicine.
Don't worry.
MP
Thank you again,
Richardson?
Mr. Speaker. Everybody's telling me to be quick, and I will do that.
Thank you.
I know about 2 minutes, but I will be quick, Mr. Speaker.
3 minutes, be good.
Well, let me just do this real quick, Mr. Speaker. As I prepared for today to come and to, just reflected on what has transpired over the past couple of weeks now, as we went through from the entire budget process, starting at February 17 when it was delivered up until now. One of my unfortunate thoughts, to be honest, is that, and everybody be patient for a minute, because as I thought about it, right, I think that Bermuda ultimately has lost. And what I mean by that is that the idea was for the government to propose a budget and then for us to go through and have a very robust debate. And I think part of it did not occur, which is a concern, Mr. Speaker. And obviously I'm mindful that I'm not, the rules do not allow me to go back over past debates. And so I'm being very mindful of that, Mr. Speaker. And what I would do to make my point, though, Mr. Speaker, is that at some points, the debate fell to a very low level. At some level, to be honest, there was, as I said before, a nil response. And for that, Bermuda is the loser. Mr. Speaker, if you think about it in terms of a competition, some people would like to go to a game, for example, and have one team, if you take the football example, one team win, 5-0. That's not me, Mr. Speaker. What I prefer to do is to have a game whereby it's tight, whereby you may end up with 3-2, for example, and you don't know, because it's a seesaw game, you never know who is going to win at the end, because that causes you, Mr. Speaker, to be on your edge. And in that context, Mr. Speaker, I don't think that the response that came from the OBA this time around did that. There is many things I could say, Mr. Speaker. And as we know now, Mr. Speaker, we're getting some interpolation. But now, Mr. Speaker, is very good because, Mr. Speaker, that the honorable member, Mr. Speaker, who has sometimes not been honorable in his comments, did say many things during the debate, Mr. Speaker, and I believe he has now allowed me to say this, Mr. Speaker. I'm looking at you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm speaking to you, Mr. Speaker. But what I'll say is, Mr. Speaker, is that one of the points that I want to clarify today, Mr. Speaker, is what I think is necessary, that we know that the OBA was the government between December 17, 2012, and July 18, 2017. And one point that keeps coming up, Mr. Speaker, is that what happened to the debt during that period of time, Mr. Speaker? And I will say, Mr. Speaker, that during that time, the debt did double. And the debt doubled, Mr. Speaker, because the net debt when they came in was $1.2 billion, and when they left, it was $2.4 billion, Mr. Speaker. And I know, Mr. Speaker, that one honorable member is going to go now and go to the book, and he's going to tell me I am wrong, Mr. Speaker, because the gross debt was 1.574. But, Mr. Speaker, he is incorrect. He is incorrect, Mr. Speaker, and he can say what he wants to say, Mr. Speaker, but I have the information, and yes, you can go and look, Mr. Speaker. I have the information for every single year, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
If you choose.
The honorable member is misleading the House. C-29 of the budget book for the PLP, 1.574. Yes, that is it. C-29. There you go.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Speaker,
Point of order.
I must, because it is vital to clarify the record. Because I know that the honorable member is new to this House. He has been here about 3 years, but he's relatively new, even though he's been doing a lot of work for the opposition over many years. But the fact remains that in this country, debt under our laws is defined as net debt. And the honorable member who is speaking now on the motion to adjourn, is correct. In 2012, net debt was 1.2 billion, and in 2017, it was 2.4. That is double.
Mr. Speaker, I'm gonna do my best now. I'm gonna calm down, Mr. Speaker. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm gonna go slow, Mr. Speaker. On March 12, Mr. Speaker, the gross debt was 1.35 million. The sinking fund was 114 million, a net debt of 1.2 billion. When the OBA left, Mr. Speaker, the gross debt was 2.5 billion, $150 million in the sinking fund, and the net debt was 2.4 billion, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order. Point of order. Again, the honorable member is misleading the House. I refer him to page C29 of the budget book. He's just referred to the gross debts. 2012, 2013, 1574000. And when the PLP comes in, it is 2.483935. I'm sorry, it's there in black and white.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honorable member, I'm not going to go back and forth, Mr. Speaker, but what I'll do is this, and I'll go a little bit slower, Mr. Speaker. What the honorable member is referring to is the information on March 2013. The gross debt was 1.5 billion, sinking fund 97 million, a net debt of 1.5 billion. That is just what it's referring to, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, the challenge is, let me put it this way. You and I are going to participate in a race. It's a 100-meter dash. And guess what, Mr. Speaker? The start line is where the start line is. And you may choose, Mr. Speaker, for whatever reason, to either go at 75 or 200. But guess what? You're at the wrong starting point. And Mr. Speaker, at this point in time—
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Wrong point.
The honorable member is again misleading the House. The question as to whose debt it is who borrows the money. If it is the PLP that borrow the money, that is why it is 1.574. I mean, come on, guys. You're not fooling anyone.
I'm going to suggest that you use your explanations on your 20 minutes so you can clearly speak yourself through.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll come back. And now, Mr. Speaker, I know that there are many persons listening, Mr. Speaker, and so I will say one more time that in March 2012, March 31, 2012, the gross debt was 1.35 billion. The sinking fund, 114 million. The net debt was 1.2 billion. And when they left, Mr. Speaker, the next reporting year would have been 2018,
let
Mr.
him
Speaker.
finish. If you're going to repeat yourself, just let him finish. You can
Thank
do
you.
It, you can do it under your 20 minutes.
I wasn't going to repeat myself. I was going to point out that March 2012 was in fact not when the OBA government was elected. It was December 2012. And during the year from March 2012, it was a PLP budget. Again, the honorable member is misleading the House.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We'll stop this pop up and down, pop down thing. And I'll just say one more time, we can leave, Mr. Speaker. I know we're supposed to use parliamentary language, right? So I don't want to refer him to whack-a-mole, but let's leave it for now. And I'll just say one more time, Mr. Speaker, that the information is that March 2012, the net debt was 1.2 billion, and when they left, the next reporting period was 2.4, and that is double. Mr. Speaker, one of the things I was referring to is that they say, and I'll come back to this point, Mr. Speaker, just to say this, that what was a concern, and it hasn't been spoken about before, and so I think I can say this, and that is, Mr. Speaker, that what I have in my hand here is the reply to the budget delivered by the Honorable N.H. Cole Simons, JPMP, dated February 24th. And so we went through that process, Mr. Speaker. And one of my comments, Mr. Speaker, that I want to make is about this whole idea of a TA. Not in detail, but just to say if we follow the honorable member's line of thought, it was delivered as the OBA response, and then that was on February 24. On February 27, on the Monday, there was a significant retraction. And my point here, Mr. Speaker, is that if the honorable member would refer to what I was saying on February 24 as I was lying, and Mr. Speaker, by the way, if anyone is asking for evidence, If you go back to the debate on that day, look at the bottom section, around about 4 hours and 30 minutes, you would hear exactly what I'm talking about now. And the honorable member's responses. He said that I was lying. And after lots of challenges and ultimately with your direction, he pulled it back and said I was speaking untruth as opposed to lying. And so I'll leave that there.
I'm glad you cleared up that it was attended to at that moment.
Yes. And so, Mr. Speaker, what I'll now say, though, in terms of if it was correct that the OBA reply was the OBA reply on Friday and it was changed on Monday, what was the actual reply? And is it simply applicable that the Honorable Cole Simons, to use the Honorable Member's words, was either lying or speaking an untruth? Then what is in fact the correctness on the Monday as to where we stand now? And that's why I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, I think I've made the point now, Mr. Speaker, in terms of why Bermuda loses. It's just as if, Mr. Speaker, if you go back to the analogy of the 100-yard dash, right? If you start at the wrong spot or you somehow get disqualified, there is no race. And that's the reality in this case, Mr. Speaker. And it is a serious thing because now we have what we should have and don't have, I suppose, is no real rebuttal to what the PLP has done. Mr. Speaker, earlier I referred to, and the Honorable Cole Simons thankfully gave me the illustration in terms of sitting on a fence, Mr. Speaker, and now I don't know what the fence is. And even, Mr. Speaker, and I said to myself, Anthony, be mindful that you don't use schizophrenia because that is a proper medical term. But then when I look at some of the responses, Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure where we are. Even, Mr. Speaker, something very similar, something very simple, Mr. Speaker. Normally, green is positive and negative and red is negative, right? But for some reason, Mr. Speaker, even on this document, right, you have red on top going up and green on the bottom going down. And so when I first saw it, I said, oh my goodness, what has happened? And so I don't know, Mr. Speaker, where we end up. And so, Mr. Speaker, I know that you're always late, but I think I've made the point, Mr. Speaker, in terms of where are we, what did they do, and in my opinion, it's been difficult to really understand and follow through. And no, they say, I'm going to say what they say now because also, Mr. Speaker, I wasn't going to go there, but I've got a few minutes, and I'll say this, Mr. Speaker. I was actually concerned when I woke up one day and I actually looked online and I saw an I saw a Burn News report. And the Burn News report talked about Minister Hayward. And what concerned me beyond those comments was that whoever released the statement was too lazy to check some of the facts. One blatant fact, Mr. Speaker, was a reference to Madam AG having made a comment. And I was in the chamber. Madam AG did not speak at all in that context. And then I started to think to myself, why would someone take the time to try to magnify an issue but be too lazy to check the facts, Mr. Speaker? And then, Mr. Speaker, my mind unfortunately started to wonder in terms of what in the world are they doing? And I will go further, Mr. Speaker, than most have gone. Minister Hayward, I would say to you, take heart. The reason why I say that is this. You're doing a very good job. You're doing an excellent job. You're doing a more than excellent job. And that is why you're in their target. We need to understand that. If you were ineffective, if you were lazy, if you were not achieving, if you were not going over and beyond, they wouldn't care about you. So that is why, Minister Hayward, and for everyone else, take heart. They take notice of those that are doing a good job. You know you're doing a good job. So don't worry about what they say. What we say is we have your back in more ways than one. And so, Mr. Speaker, I do think it's time for me to conclude. And I'll conclude, Mr. Speaker, with a question to the honorable member who sometimes chooses not to use honorable language and honorable descriptions. And I'll simply say this. They say, Mr. Speaker, that the reply was their response. And if we accept the description that is used by the honorable member when he chooses to be honorable, Bermuda has in fact been the loser because the response, Mr. Speaker, simply did not meet the expected standard. And as I said from the beginning, Bermuda, Mr. Speaker, I say is the loser as a result of such a poor response. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. Does any other honorable member wish to? MP Weeks, are you rising for your 20 minutes?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Thank
MP
you.
Weeks, the clock is on.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would rather have not risen after such an eloquent presentation by my learned colleague. But Mr. Speaker, my remarks this evening is of a different nature. You know, when we do our budget presentations and they have a lot of information and we cannot always highlight the information, all the information that one may deem important. But Mr. Speaker, what I'm going to talk about tonight is that while there's justifiably been a significant emphasis and attention placed on violence and antisocial behavior, I would like to address something that's really concerning to me and concerning to our country. And that, Mr. Speaker, is our behavior on the roads. The stats, Mr. Speaker, if you allow me, are very alarming, and they're particularly worrying for a community of our size. This data confirms that enforcement alone, and I must emphasize that, Mr. Speaker, that enforcement alone will not change what is happening on our streets. So I want to consider some sobering numbers in relation to the size of our driving population. So as I had asked, Mr. Speaker, just want a little leeway in reading a couple of statistics. Since 2015, Mr. Speaker, there have been over 49,000 tickets issued for driving offenses. Yeah, 49,000 in our country in the last 8 years. In that same 8-year period, over 14,000 cautions were also issued for driving offenses. So that's 63,900 times someone has gotten caught. Sadly, we still see on a daily basis the offenses on our road and the risk. But let me break that down, Mr. Speaker, but I done a little bit of math. For 63,900 people, over the last 8 years, that equates to 650 offenses a month. 21 a day, which equates to almost 1 every hour. In the same 8-year period, Mr. Speaker, and members of the public, there were 1,900 arrests for impaired driving. There were some 89 fatalities on our road during this period. So over the last 18 years, Mr. Speaker, if we do a little more calculations, over the last 8 years, those 89 fatalities equates to almost 1 a month. There were 769 road traffic accidents, Mr. Speaker, that resulted in life-changing injuries that equates to 8 a month over the 8-year period. Mr. Speaker, what's ironic? As I was on my way this afternoon to come back to the House of Assembly, a mother stopped me on my walk here, and she walked with me. And she said she remembered that my son had passed 10 years ago, and she said that in the same year, her son had gotten a serious accident, had injuries. And she said that her son has not been the same, and he looks good on the outside. But it's an example of the life-changing injuries that we see in this country almost on a daily basis. There have been 4,500 road traffic accidents that has resulted in less serious injuries. That equates over the last 8 years to 47 a month. 5,000 road traffic accidents that resulted in vehicle damage. Over the last eight years, that results, my math says, is almost 2 a day. The numbers, and we have to keep in mind, Mr. Speaker, that the numbers will be much worse. But during this 8-year period, we had 3 years of COVID. We had 3 years of COVID, Mr. Speaker, and we still have alarming numbers of fatalities and road accidents that were life-changing. Mr. Speaker, under my tenure, and actually before my tenure, there was a Operation Vega that targeted road traffic offenses, and I always commend the officers for their work. But, Mr. Speaker, like I said earlier, it's more than just the police doing the job. We all have a part to play. And we have to remember that one momentary lack of attention can result in a life-changing injury or death. But while I'm on my feet, I also want to address drink driving. The number of persons that have been arrested confirms that the repeated message somehow, Mr. Speaker, is not getting through. Drinking and driving puts not only your life at risk, but the lives of other road users. This is completely and utterly unacceptable. So, Mr. Speaker, I implore everyone to take responsibility for their own actions and don't put others at risk. We have to take these numbers to heart. But these are numbers that I have just recited, but the people. These are people, these are our family members, Mr. Speaker. As I look around, I know that almost everyone in this chamber has a family member that has been affected somehow, some way from the road. Some have family that they have lost. Some have family that have been altered for the rest of their life. So I implore parents and guardians to talk to their teens about the dangers of driving. And we have to take responsibility as a community. So if you suspect a drunk driver, report him, call the police, provide the location and direction. You may be saving not only that person, but that person can be saved from hurting an innocent person, either riding, walking, driving. So there is no excuse for drinking and driving. And there are so many ways to join that out without putting yourself and others at risk. So again, Mr. Speaker, I have some points I'd like to just recite to you. Identify a designated driver for your group. Don't ever let friends drive after drinking. If you've been drinking, get a ride home from a friend who has not been drinking, or have someone call you a taxi. If you host a party with alcohol, offer alcohol-free beverages, and remind guests to designate a sober driver. Just, Mr. Speaker, don't let friends drive drunk. We at the Ministry of National Security, we work tirelessly every day to ensure that our country remains safe in the community. We brainstorm and we discuss these urgent matters with intention. And no, Mr. Speaker, this ministry that I've now been tasked with being the minister of, we don't have all the answers. So everyone that hears me today in this chamber and on the radio, I would appreciate any kind of input that one may give to help. There are a few short-term preventions that I would like to propose as some food for thought as we attempt to address this very critical issue. And again, Mr. Speaker, I ask your indulgence. Perhaps we should look at, for a time designated, having all lines marked with yellow on our roads. We know that white lines give motorists the unsaid license to overtake. So perhaps let's think about making all lines yellow. Again, only for a time. it could be a possible deterrent. Who knows? But maybe it could be worth a try. Perhaps, Mr. Speaker, we need to look at, again, for a time designated, having all motorcycle speeds reduced to 50 cc. All motorcycles. This would reduce the inclination for someone to speed with deliberate intention, possible deterrent. Who knows? But maybe it's worth a try. What we are doing has not been working. I said earlier that in the last 8 years, we are averaging 1 road fatality a month. And we're averaging 2 life-changing accidents a month. These are statistics that are alarming. Bermuda numbers. These are our brothers, our sisters, our sons, our daughters. And perhaps, Mr. Speaker, we can empower the clubs and organizations or house party hosts to call law enforcement when someone has had too much to drink and has become uncooperative and wanting to drink and drive. So, Mr. Speaker, what I've said are just some possible suggestions as we grapple with this very serious issue. Someone once said, Mr. Speaker, when I was sitting and contemplating, I came across a quote, and the quote goes thus: "Problems left unattended tend to become a crisis." We are losing our men and our women, young and old, to the roads. So we are certainly at a crisis mass, Mr. Speaker. From where I stand, this is a national crisis, Mr. Speaker. We talk about it, but we don't give it much thought after we read in the newspaper that there's another person, another family, another person lost their life, another family that is mourning. So we cannot minimize the impact of this crisis on our families. We cannot minimize the impact of what I'm talking about right now. And like most know in this chamber, I know firsthand. I know firsthand, Mr. Speaker. I lost a 24-year-old son to our roads 10 years ago. And ironically, it was Christmas Day, Mr. Speaker. And not a day goes by that I am not impacted by this tragedy. But not just me as his father. He now has a daughter that's 14 years old, has lost all memory of her father. So, you leave behind siblings, extended family, job family, friends. The pain is insurmountable and the lasting thoughts never end. I am a member of many organizations and clubs, Mr. Speaker, but this is a fraternity that no one ever wants to become a part of, having to deal with the reality that they have lost someone to our roads. I don't have the answers. The answers are not going to be easy. Some of the answers may be far out, Mr. Speaker. But we as a community have to recognize that what is the carnage that is happening on our roads is a national crisis. And I thought, Mr. Speaker, that I had to rise to my feet because when I had the opportunity of the budget, we were moving too fast to really emphasize it and focus on it. So thank you for your time, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister, for your comments. Does any other member wish to? MP Famous?
Mr. Speaker, good evening. I honestly was not even planning on coming back here. I left earlier.
I saw you have your bags here and at the door.
No, that was somebody else's bid.
All right.
I left here at 6, Mr. Evening, to Mr. Speaker, to take a visiting guest out for the evening. And after the evening was over, we were driving him back to his hotel, and I had the house on. And the premier was giving his presentation on the customs relief. So I was explaining to him, we're giving relief to school children, we're giving relief to clubs, so on and so forth. He says, oh, that's a good thing. Then he heard the opposition leader get up and said, opposition leader was giving compliments. And he was like, who is this person speaking? I said, oh, that's the opposition leader. He said, oh, the opposition leaders give him compliments. I said, yeah, we were on different sides, but they honestly recognize when things are good that they will give compliments. A few seconds later, someone else got up and someone else was less than complimentary, Mr. Speaker. I don't know.
Just talk to the chair. Talk to the chair.
And the visitor, second day in Bermuda, says, who's that? I said, well, that person is on the opposition as well. And he says, man, they really sound like they have an axe to grind. I said, not really. They're just they come from a different perspective. And the visitor gave me his perspective on that person's perspective. And it wasn't so complimentary, and put that way. So I thought to myself, Mr. Speaker, usually I've been studying the OBA before they became the OBA. All the trends, all the tricks, all the whatever, right? And here lately, they have a certain trend. Here we are, motion to adjourn. None of them are going to speak to it. None of them. They might point an order me, but none of them really speaking motion to adjourn. But what they do, what they tend to do, as the honorable member from Constituency 7 said, is that somewhere along the line, there's going to be a little small snippet of social media that they're going to clip out of something that somebody said. That's going to find itself on Bermuda, Twitter, Royal Gazette, you name it. So in studying the OBA, that's the latest tactic. Don't say anything in motion to adjourn because we probably won't make it out. I said probably.
Okay, talk to the chair.
Possibly, probability. Let's do a Pearl Harbor on them through social media, right? So in studying, when you play football or some competitive sport, you look at the opponent, you see how they play, you say, okay, well, they mastered that tactic, right? You can't blame them. That's what they have to work with. That's what they're going to work with. So what I would say to the public is that, yes, you may get a 30-second snippet on social media. And in today's people's mindset where they have what they call that mindset? A TikTok mindset. That's the reality. If they saw it on TikTok, it's real. They don't look at the whole context, right? So I say to the public, yes, the OBA will come with this TikTok tactic. Let me put it that way. Let me coin a phrase, TikTok strategy. That's the OBA's plan. That's fine. That's what you guys have to work with. Work with it. But I say to my brothers and sisters on our side that we have to be equally as savvy and get our message across to the people, because all Bermudas are people, as evident in the last election. Mr. Speaker, let me move on. MP Derek Burgess, the Deputy Speaker, said something earlier about apprenticeship scheme. Mr. Speaker, back in 1980s, thereabout, telephone company, some people would know it as telco, but they had yellow trucks. They had an apprenticeship scheme for what they call summer casuals. So whether you're high school or college students, you got to work there during the summer, or some people got to work there. And you didn't just learn how to install telephones or go into offices and install PBX lines. You learned about customer relationship. You learned about soft skills, making time. You learned about interpersonal relationships with men. And occasionally during lunchtime, you learned a little bit about yucca, right? We say that how important it is to have these apprenticeship programs, because you didn't just learn a skill. You didn't just build relationships. you learn how to be a man. And what's missing in many of our corporate entities is that they don't have apprenticeship schemes. Belco has gone out of its way in the last couple of years to have an apprenticeship scheme. Other companies, the works in engineering, they do it. So I would take this time to encourage any company that can afford it, even if you can afford one apprentice, take that person on. Okay, check the workforce development. Okay, my mistake. I would encourage companies to take on an apprentice because 40 years ago, I was somebody's apprentice. There were other people in this room who were somebody's apprentice. And that helps to build the next generation. The trend that we're on, as Honorable Burgess said, we're on a trajectory that negative birth rate. Unless we build our next set of apprentices, it's over for the Bermudian workforce. So I would thank you for the time, Mr. Speaker, and I just say to Bermuda, don't fall for the TikTok.
Thank you.
And thank you to the VIP for intervening.
Thank you, honorable member. MP Kennedy.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, good evening.
Good evening.
I'll take 10 minutes. Last week, we had the opportunity of listening to the Honorable Keynes talk about on the roads. And then this evening, Honorable Member Minister Weeks, a very sobering two speeches that were given, and then to listen to the Honorable Member Weeks, who has personally experienced the wrath of the roads. I don't think any of us could even imagine what that was like to go through. As many of you know, when we leave this evening, and most evenings, a lot of you see me getting on my bike, and there's somebody, you on your bike again? Yeah, I actually enjoy riding my bike. But I will say this, whatever we need to do, somehow we need to come up with some solutions. I can assure you that doesn't matter. I'm sure these guys aren't drinking right after work. Maybe they are sometimes when I'm going down. But I've been passed on the inside, on the outside. But what's shocking is not just guys. Ladies as well. And those who are passing on the roads are not just young people, but they're my age as well. And I must admit, last week was, when I left here, was the scariest time I had. 3 riders. I didn't even hear them. Usually you hear the bike. For whatever reason, I did not hear these bikes. And I could literally, I felt like I could feel the warmth from this guy. He was that close passing me. So maybe it was a thrill for him. But what I didn't anticipate was the other one chasing him on the inside of me. Because I pulled over, not realizing I had somebody passing me on the inside. And thank God, with that split second, I'm not sure if I should say I missed him or he missed me. But we got to figure something out. One of our civil servants who was here when we were doing cabinet office happens to be a very, very close friend of mine. We went away to, and I thank the Premier for hiring me as well in the IT department. He and I are best friends from high school. We went away to high school.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order.
I hate to interrupt the honorable gentleman.
Premier didn't hire him.
Oh,
Thank you.
Premier didn't hire him.
Thank you.
Premier didn't hire him.
The
get
political
hired.
government is not responsible for hiring of
We
public
didn't hire-
officers.
we didn't hire people.
Yes, that's correct. I'm sure you help with the situation.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
And it's all up to the civil service. The civil
Point of order,
service-
Mr. Speaker.
The civil service do all the
The honorable
hiring.
member is completely clear of what is stated inside of Public Service Commission regulations, read the constitutional order and everything else, that anyone who lobbies or goes to a member of the legislature for a position of government is disqualified. There is no involvement from the political government. It is important that that statement be retracted, Mr. Speaker. It is not correct, and it can lead to things.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under the leadership of the PLP, the civil servant that I know of as a very close friend of mine joined the PLP, our government. And he was heading up west to the west and on business for Bermuda. And coming the opposite direction was a young man who was popping a wheelie on the other side of the road and lost control, popping a wheelie in the middle of traffic, trying to avoid traffic, rode right into him. Now, we lost him for a couple of weeks because he was messed straight up. Or because somebody felt that they needed to show off, I guess, or pop a wheelie during the middle of traffic, traveling to the west, knowing that our roads are narrow. Somehow, and we've got to put our minds together to figure out what it is that we need to do. We're all seeing it played out in front of us. We actually are losing people unnecessarily. And then, for me, personally, someone close, speeding, didn't stop at a sign. In fact, the father of two of my grandkids, speeding right into a car. And so now he's laid up in the hospital for a night, and not sure whether they're going to save his leg or not. You know, and all because we just got to get there, whatever it is that we are doing. I really don't know what the solution is. I thought, Minister Weeks, that maybe we have more police officers out on the roads trafficking, but of course that takes them away from some of the other things that they're doing. But somehow and in some way, I'm saying that if I can be of support, or any of us on this side can be of support, I'm hoping that we can find a solution to this here. The honorable member brought up the fact that we are living and we're not having enough birth rates, and we're dying as a people, and this doesn't help. So I'm hoping that we can put our minds together to come up with a solution, because what we have right now, I'm afraid that 2023 may be an extremely disappointing year. I take to heart what Minister Keynes was saying. Already it's March, and I don't even remember the number. Four road fatalities already. And then to listen to the statistics that Minister Weeks was coming up, I'm hoping that we can find some way to resolve this issue, curb the tide of the speeding on our roads. I must say, even if you go to 50 cc's, man, these 50 cc's, I don't know what they do to them. They got blue tags, but they're going faster than 125 cc, that's for sure. So somehow we got to figure this out. And I'm saying that we're lending our support. We kind of tease each other sometimes. I know it's just 6 of us, but we are lending our support to this cause, because any life loss doesn't speak well for our future here in Bermuda. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, MP Cannonier. Premier, you have your...
20 minutes, Mr. Speaker.
I could do less if you like.
I probably will use all 20.
Go ahead.
Hopefully not. Hopefully we'll make it home before midnight, but I know you got to travel a bit further than the rest of us. Mr. Speaker, I rise to my feet today, motion to adjourn. Grateful for your dispensation and the opposition's agreement to lay our final session from the 17th to the 24th of this budget session. And certainly, we've had a number of contributions on today's motion to adjourn from the Deputy Speaker, who spoke about the realities of the situation the country faces and lended his support to the Minister of Economy and Labor as he progresses on a thoughtful approach to making sure we're not arguing over numbers, but going over real data and setting our policies to accomplish that. Certainly from the Honorable Member for Constituency number 7, who spoke about the reality of which we face in this Honorable House, and the fact that Bermuda loses when we do not, raise and engage our level of debate. And I'll get to that in a little bit, Mr. Speaker. And certainly the passionate contributions from the Honorable Minister from Constituency number 16 and the Minister of National Security, who spoke about the issue of road safety and certainly the intensely personal impact that it has on him. How we can, without question, empathize over that situation. And the contribution certainly from the honorable member from position number 11, who spoke about apprenticeships, just like the deputy speaker did. And just want to remind everyone who's listening that under the leadership of the honorable member for constituency number 3, when she was responsible for the Ministry of Labor, we made sure that we launched and funded an apprenticeship program, made sure that we put it out there. And the fact is that the government has a budget to pay for apprenticeships. Companies do not even have to pay, Mr. Speaker. We provide those opportunities, and there's many young persons who are taking advantage of that opportunity, something that this government funded, which was not previously funded. We made sure we put that in place because it is part of our ethos to ensure that persons were not denied the opportunity so they could, become trained. And I welcome I would say the input from the honorable member, and I empathize with him, who's certainly a situation with his particular family. And certainly your thoughts go out to his family member who's been affected by the carnage that is occurring on our roads. And Mr. Speaker, yes, certainly this issue is tragic because it's not just the death on our roads, but it is also those persons who are injured on our roads, because the long-term injuries are bad oftentimes. Speaker, I want to address an issue this evening, because as the honorable member from constituency number 7 had said, Bermuda loses when we do not actually rise to the level of debate which is necessary and expected in this honorable chamber. And Mr. Speaker, I am saddened by the consistent approach which is being taken by the opposition's campaign arm and media machine, which is certainly in overdrive. And during a debate earlier, I said that I certainly live rent-free in the opposition's head. There is never a point in time when they do not, have the opportunity to find a way to throw my name into something, which is fine. And I guess it's just like, MP Anthony Richardson did say, that's because you are doing something and they want to try to knock you off stride. But they're not going to do so. And it's really, really a shame. And I spoke to the opposition leader before he left because he's not in the chamber. But it's really, really a shame at the level of, I'm going to call it trash, Mr. Speaker. Trash that we get sometimes from the opposition. And what I'm speaking to, Mr. Speaker, is about a statement that was put out today by the opposition leader. Statement that was sent from the OBA media arm up there on top of the music box, or from the UK, where I know their PR person is based. To cast an aspersion and to try to tie things where they do not exist. And it's troublesome because this is their modus operandi. And as I said, the opposition leader is not here, but I did tell him that I will address this particular issue tonight in motion to adjourn. And members of the media who contacted me, I said, listen to my motion to adjourn because I will address this issue tonight, motion to adjourn. But Mr. Speaker, members in the Ministry of Finance, certainly the Bermuda Monetary Authority, and myself as Minister of Finance has certainly been monitoring the activities which are taking place in our largest trading part of the United States, with certain levels of instability in their banking system, with the second largest bank failure in U.S. history, which occurred last week. And certainly the impacts are far-reaching. And we've seen significant action that was taken by the federal government, even as much as a statement, Mr. Speaker, which I had to step out to listen to from the President of the United States this morning at 10 a.m. before the markets opened. But there were There was a bank failure last week, a bank failure the week before, and then action that was taken. The third bank that was closed, Mr. Speaker, was Signature Bank, and it was closed by New York regulators. Now, I'm not going to speak into specifics about it, but I do want to speak about the level of misinformation and misdirection which comes from the opposition. And so people in Bermuda can understand the truth and the facts. So we start, this is the opposition leader's statement. It says, following the closure of Signature Bank by New York regulators, opposition leader Cole Simmons noted that in 2019, Cole Simons noted that in 2019, the government, and I quote, unveiled its relationship with Signature Bank as a banking service solution for Bermuda's fintech companies. And he then asks, and I quote, now that this banking option is off the table, what is next for Bermuda's emerging digital assets and cryptocurrency industry? So, Mr. Speaker, rather than a measured approach, rather than a conversation with me here asking what is going on, how is this impacted, nothing. Nothing from the honorable member who has seen me from the morning session, saw me last weekend or last week when we were in the House, nothing. Just a statement of attack that is put out to me, and I'll get to why it is to me in a minute. But the basis is, Mr. Speaker, as I said in my budget statement, I offered them an opportunity to support innovation, which they failed to do in their budget statement and are clearly failing to do now. The statement went on to say, Mr. Speaker, if I may, Mr. Simon says, and I quote, Signature Bank, Bermuda's banking solution for our emerging digital asset business and our emerging cryptocurrency business is closed by New York State regulators on Sunday and is now under the control of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, according to Reuters, the third largest failure in banking history. I'm going to take that section, Mr. Speaker, and just say, no, Signature Bank, Bermuda's banking solution for our emerging digital asset business. Mr. Speaker, the bank isn't even licensed in Bermuda. And it would be nice if we had a fully ready to go banking solution, but those things don't happen overnight. But here's where it is, Mr. Speaker, and I want to go with his quotes. We'll go on. What a blow to Premier Bert's emerging fintech and digital asset industry. And moreover, what will be the impact to the reputation for Bermuda Inc., as the government has reportedly been working diligently to promote Bermuda as the destination of choice for fintech companies looking for a place to domicile, end quote. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to speak to what action New York State regulators may or may not have taken. I can speak to the fact that the former head of the House of Representatives Committee on Financial Services, former Representative Barney Frank, who sits on the board of said bank, did say that there was, in his view, no reason for the insolvency as the bank was able to carry on operations. But as I said, I'm not going to delve into the issues there. But here's what I will say, Mr. Speaker. How does the opposition get upon gloating on a situation that may happen overseas, which may impact businesses here that employ Bermudians? Mr. Speaker, one of their former members, he used to sit in this honorable house, works inside of this industry, heads up an office in Bermuda inside of this industry. There are many persons, we heard the opposition leader talking about young people who are coming back with their degrees, earning $135,000. They're working in this industry. I don't understand how it is a blow to Premier Bert. It is a blow to those persons who may be affected. This is the point, Mr. Speaker. It is as though if they are so blinded by their hatred and animosity towards me, that they would put out a statement like this to use a situation that has absolutely nothing to do with Bermuda in an attempt to try to tie it in somehow and attack. But it gets worse, Mr. Speaker. The statement then goes on to say, in a media release from February 2019, the Burt government unveiled its relationship with Signature Bank as a banking service solution for Bermuda's fintech companies and boasted that, subquote, Bermuda is setting itself apart by providing regulatory certainty combined with a world-renowned reputation for transparency and the highest standards for global compliance. Signature Bank's endorsement showcased how Bermuda is competitively placed to advance the pace of digitization of global commerce as modern technologies applied in the highly regulated world of finance. No problem there, Mr. Speaker. Here's the thing. The Burt government unveiled its relationship. Here's the truth, Mr. Speaker. Local banks wouldn't bank. The diligent persons in the public service worked to find a solution that worked. But I know that the combined opposition is trying, like ever, to use a circumstance completely out of control of the government of Bermuda as an attempt to try to tear down the ambitions of this government. No relation whatsoever. But it goes on, Mr. Speaker. Now that this banking option is off the table, what is next for Bermuda's emerging digital asset and cryptocurrency industry? Did our government perform adequate due diligence before they entered into a relationship with Signature Bank? Were they providing any ongoing monitoring and due diligence since the start of the relationship? Mr. Speaker, ongoing monitoring of an overseas bank? Should we now, Mr. Speaker, get the name of every single bank that every single company in Bermuda may use overseas and start running assessments for every single one of those things? Come on, is this really the level of which we're getting from the Shadow Minister of Finance and the opposition leader when speaking about a situation that could have real impact? No comment or question about financial stability. No comments or question about how our local banks may be affected, such as Butterfield Bank, who's had issues in the stock market recently. They had to put out a statement. But thankfully, the BMA has said today that there's no challenges there. None of that. Just straight to attack. Really? Ongoing monitoring? This bank was licensed by the US government and regulated by the state of New York, which is the top level of regulation in the country of the United States. Did they conduct and did they take one thing from a Reuters press release? If they did, were they aware that in September, almost a quarter of deposits came from cryptocurrency and the bank announced in December will shrink its crypto-related deposits by $8 billion? This should have been a red flag. A red flag for what, Mr. Speaker? This is regulation and supervision that is happening in another country. Really? So desperate to try to tear down the ambitions of this government. So desperate that even when we're in the budget debate, the thoughts that knowing that there are big companies looking to come here who have met with the opposition, and they could even take the opportunity in their budget statement to say, we support. And it is classic. Anything that they could do to try to tarnish and rub the name of the leader of the Progressive Labor Party through the mud, they will do it. They will take misfortune in other places and they will try their best to tie it around. And finally, as it ends, again, this mega bank failure is extremely alarming and has the real potential of compromise Bermuda's blue chip financial services jurisdictional reputation. Nonsense, Mr. Speaker. Absolute nonsense. To be clear, there are fintech companies in Bermuda that may use that bank services. There are fintech companies in Bermuda that use other bank services. There are fintech companies in Bermuda that actually are getting access to some local banking services. Those are the facts of reality. But we in this house must have confidence in our ability to pass and scrutinize legislation in this House, and have confidence and ability for our independent financial services regulator to manage those risks. But let's get away from this nonsense of trying to use any type of misfortune, completely unrelated, and tie it in to me, Mr. Speaker. Because the fact is that the reason why there are companies looking to come to Bermuda, the reason why there's companies that are set up in Bermuda, the reason why their foreign member is heading an office in Bermuda, the reason why there's digital asset insurers in Bermuda, the reason why there is more capital coming to those insurers in Bermuda is because of the work of this government, Mr. Speaker. This government. And for once, it would be nice if the party of the past tried to get on board. But as has been said, they show their spots all the time. Take the opportunity to try to tear down. But here's the thing, Mr. Speaker. The people of this country see it for what it is. And they remember, as I say all the time, Mr. Speaker, they are the past and we are the future. They are tied to this old school thinking of nothing can progress. And we see above the horizon or beyond the horizon to say that we want different and better for the future of this country. So we are going to continue, Mr. Speaker, undaunted, because guess what? Challenges will arise every single time. The measure of a government is not what you do in the face of challenge. The measure is how you overcome those challenges when they come. We will press forward, we will press ahead, and no amount of sniping from the PR operation, the One Bermuda Alliance, is going to deter us from making sure that we press ahead to make Bermuda a leader in financial services and the digitization of financial services, Mr. Speaker. So I needed to address that today. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I wish you and all members a good night and see you for our final session on the 24th.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. Thank you, members, for your participation today and throughout this budget session. As the Premier said, we'll be back here not this Friday, but the following Friday to wrap up our business for this session. Before we close tonight, I'd just like to remind members or inform those who may not know, the Parliamentary Prayer Breakfast Committee is having a luncheon to honor some of our former members. That's going to be on the 26th of March, Sunday the 26th, at 1:30 in the afternoon at Willowbank Resort. They're honoring Mr. Walter Roberts, Mr. Otto Simmons, Mr. John Barrett, and posthumously, Honorable Arthur Hudson as well. So mark it on your calendars, member. So I'm sure they'd love to see as many of us present to honor former members of this chamber. With that, have a good night and a good week, because we won't see you for the rest of this week. And the House now stands adjourned.